Welcome back to Second Take, where we talk about reclaiming your health, taking back your power, and rewriting your story. Thanks so much for joining me again for another episode as I walk through this series on how to reclaim our health, and at least how I reclaimed my health and got away from pharmaceutical medicine and understood my own power where it came to my own health. So, if you've been along for the journey thus far, you've kind of heard a little bit about who I am, where I came from, and what brought me up to the part of my life that my health really starts to take a turn for the worse. We started off talking about diagnoses that I had had. I'd already started collecting them when I was in my early 20s. At that point, the only real diagnoses I had were hypothyroid and systemic lupus erythematosus. So, timeline wise, I'm about in my early to mid 30s, and I've been in management in an insurance company for quite some time when the lifestyle factors started to really take a toll. So I was actually at the office one day when I was proctoring a test. Again, this company and their tests. I had a test that supervisors that worked for me had to take a test, and I had to, as the state claims manager, I had to proctor said test. So we had to sit in a room, and the two individuals taking the test had their computers. I had mine, and I was just watching to make sure they weren't cheating. Supposed to be watching. Anyway, I'm sitting across the table from them, and I had done my typical that morning. Got up early, got to work, got to the office very early. I never ate breakfast. I wasn't a breakfast person, so I would drink coffee in the morning, copious amounts of coffee to get going because I was always exhausted. And I'm sitting at the table and drinking my coffee, and I noticed a flutter in my heart. I could feel it. Felt really strange, had never happened before. And I kind of thought, well, that's weird. And I sat there. I remember I was clearing out emails at the time. And then it kept going and it kept going. And it started to become a rush through my body that my heart was irregular. It wasn't beating correctly. I broke out in a cold sweat. My hands got really clammy and numb. I started having pain in my left arm, and my heart started pounding. And I thought, holy shit, is this a heart attack? Like, what's going on? And I started to get really scared. And I remember feeling or having the realization that something was really wrong. I knew this was a significant problem. So I excused myself from the room, and I went out to one of my coworkers who actually was a close friend of mine and asked her to take me to urgent care because I knew I couldn't drive. And I told her what was happening. And at that point, my heart was just pounding. It felt like it was literally beating out of my chest. And I was just in this cold sweat, and I kind of felt off kilter and dizzy and just didn't feel well at all. So she threw me in the car real quick. She drove us to the urgent care, which was just a few minutes away. And when I got to urgent care, they took my pulse, and it was over 200 beats per minute. And they said, we think you could be having a heart attack. So they tossed me into an ambulance and had me driven to the heart hospital, the local larger hospital. And I remember as they shut the doors to the ambulance, here my friend's standing outside the doors of the ambulance, and I was so scared. I just remember being terrified, thinking, am I going to see my kids? Am I going to see my husband? Is this it? I'm going to have a heart attack in my mid 30s and I'm going to die. And I remember the urgent care nurse, as we were waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Actually, it wasn't the nurse, he was a doctor. We were joking around about how I'd gotten myself into this situation because, why not joke around when you're waiting for an ambulance and potentially having a heart attack? And I remember telling him, yeah, I pretty much do everything wrong. So even then there was a measure of me that knew that everything I was doing in my life, the way I was living my life, the way my lifestyle had been, was everything wrong. And we were joking around about that and how easy it is to find yourself in that mode. So anyway, I get to the heart hospital. They do a full heart workup. Turns out I didn't have a heart attack, thankfully. But what I did have was an electrical conductivity issue with my heart. That's all they could say. I was a tachycardic episode, just meaning I had a high heart rate, and they didn't know why it happened. More importantly, they didn't know if it was going to happen again. So they scheduled me to go and see a cardiologist to go get further cardio workup done with a treadmill test and these things. But they said, you need to decrease your stress level. You need to, make sure you're sleeping, this, that, and the other, all the things that I wasn't doing. And I remember thinking, there's no way that I can decrease my stress level and still be working this job. Great. So the next day, seeing my primary care provider after I was discharged from the hospital, she actually took me out of work. She said, your stress level's so high that you are a sitting heart attack waiting to happen. At that time, I'm like, I don't even know, 75, 80 pounds overweight. I didn't sleep maybe 4 or 5 hours a night. If I got 6, it was a really good day, good night. If I got 6 hours of sleep, it was typically 4 to 5. I ate very little because I was always at my desk and I never took a lunch hour. I would have like a can of tuna and a piece of fruit for lunch at my desk. I didn't eat breakfast, and dinners were often a shit show of really nasty fast food because as a family, we were in this place where the kids were in sports. My husband and I worked long hours. So by the time we got home to get the kids and get them each to their sports, we were usually divide and conquer. He would take one place and I would take the other place, and we would meet back up in the evenings, and we just didn't have time to cook a full meal. So we would grab something on the way home and we would eat whatever. And that had set me up for what became this current episode. So now I've got 6 weeks off of work. And I remember thinking, holy crap, how can I be away from my desk for 6 weeks? Because obviously they can't do it without me, right? I'm the state claims manager. I've got to be able to do what needs to be done and keep things running. I had built a really strong team by this point. I had great supervisors and great staff, and they were able to do everything without me. There was nothing that I needed to be in the office for. They did quite well without me there. So during that time period, I started realizing my lifestyle is what got me here. The way that I'm choosing to live my life is what got me in this predicament. And though that was the case, I was still getting all of these medications. They wanted me on medication for high blood pressure. They put me on that was lisinopril. They also put me on metoprolol, which was for my heart rate. They put me on metformin because I was pre-diabetic at that point. So the high blood pressure, pre-diabetes. They also had me go to a gastroenterologist to check out celiac disease because I tested positive for the celiac antibodies. So that became a thing. I had all these different issues that were now kind of the chronic disease cocktail that's very prevalent in our country still today. So all of these different issues that I had culminated in this particular instance, and this cardiac event. So during the 6 week period that I was off of work, I started thinking about how can I change my life around? How can I start doing things a little bit differently? And although that idea was there, that I needed to change the way I was living my life, I kind of fell right back into old habits. I wish I could say this was the beginning. This was the beginning of my understanding that I had responsibility for how I got here. But it really wasn't. It was the beginning of that understanding, sure. But I also quickly dismissed it when I got back to work 6 weeks later. So 6 weeks go by, I returned to the office, and even though I had the best of intentions, I fell right back into old habits because that's what we do, right? We fall back into old habits because it's easier. So here I am now, months down the road, and that episode was so scary that it was always in the back of my head. Every time I got slightly stressed out, I would start to freak out a bit and wonder if that was going to happen again. So I had a little bit of an episode with panic attacks. They were kind of few and far between, but every once in a while I would feel like a panic attack happening. And if I felt a heart flutter at all, then I would be terrified that it was going to happen again. So that started to take over my life, and that fear of either that or something worse happening started to really become an issue for me. I remember around that time, my daughter, for her 16th birthday, she wanted to go to New York City. And at that point, she was convinced she wanted to live there. So I wanted to take her there to see New York City and see what it actually was like to be there and to feel that energy. And I got us tickets to see the play Wicked, which she was a huge fan of. So we we went and we were walking around New York City, and this is not that long after this whole episode had happened. So I was still kind of in that fear mode. And at one point, my daughter Lexi is very non-confrontational, and we're getting onto the subway or getting off of the subway, and we were on our way to somewhere else in New York City. We're just kind of doing the tourist thing. And we're on the subway, we're getting off, and of course there are people coming on as we're getting off. And I walk through these people to get off the subway and I hear mom. And as I turn my head around, the doors are starting to close and my daughter's on the other side. She's still on the subway. And I hear her yell and the fear, the instant fear, like, oh my God. And back at that time, we didn't have cell phones. Like everybody didn't have a cell phone. So this wasn't, the age that it is today that absolutely everybody has a phone. And had we gotten separated, it could have been disastrous. But I remember reaching through, grabbing her by the shirt, and just yanking her off the subway. And the fear of that put me into a panic attack. So that was really horrible to have happen in front of my child. It was just an awful way to end this, what had been a wonderful weekend. But it kind of definitely soured the experience for her, which was horrible. So anyway, these things were happening in my day-to-day life. And yet I'm now collecting these medications that don't really make me feel that great. So all of this starts to happen and I start picking up more and more that I am not going to be able to continue to do things the way I've always done them and get back to a healthy way of living my life. So when I was a kid, I always wanted to be in medicine. I started off this whole series talking about how I wanted to be I wanted to be a nurse, and ultimately a nurse practitioner back then. So I started thinking about how cool would that be to get myself out of this insurance career that I really don't enjoy as much as I could and get myself into a position that I would feel like I was better serving humanity. I was doing things for people that would mean more and that I would be able to take better care of my health. So I started thinking about leaving and going back into nursing, getting myself back into nursing school. Well, in order to even start doing that, I've got to retake a lot of my classes. The early science classes I had taken and stuff were long defunct. That had been years ago. So I started going to school again. So fast forward a bit. Now talk about, decreasing your stress levels, ultimately what I need to do. But now I'm going to school at the same time that I'm working. So it wasn't really a decrease in stress, but I was enjoying myself and I like learning about the human body. So that was fun. And eventually that led to me leaving insurance and starting a nursing school education again. And I remember the first few months were so much fun and it was going really well and I was really enjoying myself. And at this point, I'm almost 40 years old and I was one of the older students in this class, but I just loved it. I was having a blast, except my body was not having too much fun. We had to get up for clinicals. I remember at one point I was having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drive myself in for a start at clinical rotation. We had to meet at the school at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was so early and I was getting so little sleep between studying all the time and getting to my clinical rotation that I started having issues with those panic attacks again. That started happening. And I had this overwhelming sense that something was wrong. I didn't feel right. Something was wrong. I couldn't really put my finger on it. And in the meantime, I'm starting to have a lot of perimenopausal symptoms, which I didn't recognize at the time that that's what they were. But I had struggled previously with horrendous periods that resulted in uterine ablation for fibroids. I had all sorts of issues like that were going on. And so things were starting to really kind of culminate in this situation where I'm physically starting to have difficulty with what I was asking my body to do. And being in nursing school and on clinical rotation, you're not really able to sit and have full meals for a full lunch hour because you're constantly running. So I was getting to the rotation and then literally on my feet running for hours. And then you'd have very little water because you didn't want to have to go to the bathroom very often. So you're kind of chronically dehydrated. And these younger students around me who are in their 20s, they're having no trouble with this whatsoever. But me, in my almost 40-year-old body, which wasn't really well to begin with, is really struggling. And I remember thinking, wow, this might be impossible for me to make this work. And around about that time, my period started becoming so horrendous that I was really, really in a lot of pain. I've got a really high pain tolerance. I'm not one to usually have an issue with pain, but I'd been in pain the majority of my life. So compartmentalizing pain was always a thing for me. But I remember my last period, I was actually in the fetal position in tears on the floor. And my husband was going, holy shit, because he'd never seen me in pain like that. So he got me to the doctor, and they said the only thing they could really do for me was a hysterectomy. So they recommended a partial hysterectomy, which I gladly did. Not fantastic. I'm not using that stuff anyway. Let's get it out and stop this pain, this monthly ridiculous pain that I've got. And at the same time, I kind of realized I don't know that this nursing school thing is really for me, because some of what I had come to realize was that in the 20 years that had gone by since I was last in nursing school, the nursing environment had changed so much. And as I was in these clinical rotations, I realized that the nursing job that I had on such a pedestal, that I really wanted for my life, this role of helping people and helping people in their health specifically, that had changed. And for what the clinical rotations that I was seeing, what the nurses were doing was really just walking around and passing pills. We were in a nursing home for rotation. And at that point, we literally watched the nurses go from room to room passing pills. By the time they finished their rotation, it was time to start again. And it was almost ludicrous how many medications these elderly people were on. And I remember thinking, that's not what I want. This is not what I want for my career. There's no nurse sitting by your bedside discussing how to improve your health. There's no helping somebody improve their day-to-day life. There is literally just giving people one medication after another after another. So that at the time that I'm having to go in and get this partial hysterectomy, I'm also realizing I don't want to continue in this nursing career. That's definitely not for me. So now I'm warring with, well, what do I do now? Do I go back to insurance? What do I do? So meanwhile, I have the surgery. And the surgery ended up being kind of a disaster because I couldn't heal. So I have a partial hysterectomy. I go in for the hysterectomy. It was supposed to take an hour and a half tops, this surgery. And instead it took 5 hours. And the reason it took 5 hours was because my bowel was so twisted. I had one of my ovaries was twisted around and pasted to my bowel. I had another one that was attached to my bladder with adhesions. And when I came out of it, I remember the doctor kind of being aggravated and irritated because the surgery had taken so long that it impacted the rest of her scheduled surgeries for that day. And I was kind of surprised and shocked, like I didn't know that any of these things were issues. And I remember seeing the pathology report, and it came through with endometriosis that was severe. Endometriosis, adenomyosis, these things were written on the pathology report, and I didn't know what that meant. And I remember asking about it then, and the surgeon said, well, you don't have a uterus anymore. It's nothing to worry about. You won't have a cycle, so don't even worry about any of that stuff. Okay, so I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. Left the hospital, and I start my healing process, and I was really having difficulty healing. I could not heal from the incision, the incisions itself. They wouldn't heal, and I kept spotting and bleeding, and so I ended up getting put on bed rest. And the surgeon kept believing that I was doing too much, and my husband was with me saying, but she's not doing anything. She's literally staying in bed all day long. And she didn't believe us. She said, there's no way you're not doing that, because if you were, you would have been healed already. There's no reason for this not to be healing. Okay, so she was actually accusing me of lying. Meanwhile, I was literally on bed rest, but for some reason, I was not able to heal. I come to realize later what was happening, but at the time, I didn't know. All I knew was that I was doing everything I was told to do, and yet I wasn't able to heal. So that was kind of scary. And then shortly thereafter, I started having a lot of mental issues. I was hugely anxious. I'd had this little dabble with panic attacks after the tachycardic episode, but I had never really been an anxious person outside of that issue and kind of those intermittent panic attacks that were happening due to that. But this was a level of anxiety, the likes of which I had never seen. It was constant. It became insurmountable. I couldn't do anything on a day-to-day basis because I was so wound up. I was so anxious. And I even got to the point where I was pacing nonstop because I couldn't stop moving. There was something physically wrong, and I knew there was something wrong. And I remember my daughter had come home to visit from college, and I thought, I remember seeing her sitting on the couch and she was watching me. I was pacing in the dining area, and she was looking at me going, "Are you all right? Like, something's wrong with you." And at that point, I wasn't even able to hold a conversation. I had difficulty finding words, and I wasn't able to follow a thought. So in a conversation with somebody, I was really floundering. I couldn't, it felt like my brain wasn't working. It felt like I couldn't grab onto words and I couldn't follow a conversation. It was really scary. And I remember her driving me to the doctor because I knew I needed help. Something was really wrong. I knew that. So she got me to the doctor's office and I explained everything that I was experiencing. And he said he would do some blood tests, but that overall he didn't think there was anything wrong with me. It was probably in my head. So he gave me a prescription for Xanax and he sent me away. And I remember thinking, are you effing kidding me? Like, this is not in my head. I get that I'm anxious, but I'm telling you there's something physically wrong with my body. And again, I wasn't believed. And I was furious. I didn't take the Xanax. I knew there had to be something else that was wrong. So I started looking for alternatives. And as I'm looking around trying to figure out what else I could do, I started reading about naturopathic medicine and functional medicine. And I thought, well, maybe there's one of those doctors that can help me. So I'm looking up, trying to find somebody in the area. And at that time, at least, naturopathic medicine was not something that you could be licensed for in New York. So there weren't any. But I knew that medicine so far in Syracuse, New York, had done me no favors. So I really needed another alternative. And I remember finding a naturopathic medicine doctor in Connecticut. So my husband drove me there because, again, I can't drive, especially not long distances. My daughter went back to college, and he drove me out to Connecticut to see this naturopath who did his own blood work and found that I was so low in vitamin B12 that, in his opinion, was the reason for many of my symptoms. So he put me on a B12 supplement, and don't you know, immediately all of those symptoms went away. My anxiety went away, my brain fog went away, my inability to find words went away, all of the things. They all just resolved instantaneously. Wow. So I went back to my previous doctor just to let him know that that was what I had, was actually a severe B12 deficiency. And to his credit, he did say that he had never heard of such a thing and he had no idea that that could even happen. Great. So I wanted to let him know, just that in case any of his other patients experienced something like that, he knew that it was a possibility. So that opened my eyes. It really opened my eyes to the possibility that maybe our medical system didn't know everything they were supposed to know. Maybe those doctors that we see on a day-to-day basis don't necessarily understand enough in totality about the human body to actually help us be healthy. That was the beginning for me. And that began a love affair, if you want to call it, with the human body, with how it works, with the information that can help us be healthy. And it ended up being what changed my life. So what started as that episode with the heart, the tachycardic episode, though that didn't really change things for me yet, this episode now, years later with the surgery, that was the beginning of understanding that our medical system has something wrong with it. There's a problem when a doctor who you trust tells you that everything that's wrong with you is in your head. Here's some Xanax, which is habit forming. But in reality, what I really had was a significant vitamin deficiency. And in resolving that vitamin deficiency, all of these various problems that I had resolved themselves. So that was the beginning of me really, truly understanding I'm going to need to take more responsibility for my health. I'm going to need to learn how to heal myself because I can't rely on the doctor that I see to know what's actually wrong with my body. So that was the beginning of what became my full-time hobby. More in the next episode about what that looks like and how the real journey begins in me resolving my own health issues. And I'll take you through step by step how I did that in hopes that it might help some of you resolve your health issues. Because again, there is no one coming to save us. You cannot rely on having the right practitioner or getting the right supplements or getting the right drugs to truly help you resolve your health if you don't resolve the basics on your own. And the basics have to do with lifestyle. They don't have to do with a pill, they don't have to do with a supplement. They have to do with the basics of proper lifestyle so that our body is given the resources it needs to heal. And that's what I want to walk everybody through because I think no matter what your diagnosis, no matter what you're dealing with, those basics are the same for all of us. So I really want to walk you through the basics and build your understanding of the things that give you a foundation for good health. So for our next episode, I look forward to see you again. And remember, there is nobody coming to save us, but we are here to save ourselves. And you've got everything you need to do it. So I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye bye.